Welcome to the Kentucky Bourbon Traveler. Today we're going to go to Jim Beam's Claremont, Kentucky Distillery. We're also going to take a look at Jim Beam's Baker's 107 proof small batch bourbon. And we're going to have a recipe for bourbon chocolate cherry pralines. Hi, I'm Kent and welcome back to Louisville, Kentucky. This week we're headed to the historic Kentucky location of one of the largest and successful bourbon distillers and exporters in the world. The Beam family began distilling in 1795 and distilled continuously with only a small gap in distilling during Prohibition. The Beam Company carries the name of James Beauregard, known as Jim Beam, who was the fourth generation distiller in the family, who kept the business going until about World War II. Today, Beam Suntory exports its product to over 100 countries, over many different labels. In 2014, Suntory Holdings of Osaka, Japan, purchased Beam for $16 billion. Beam Suntory is the owner of both Jim Beam and Maker's Mark Bourbon. Beam's Distillery is in the very small rural community of Claremont, Kentucky. The Beam's original location is so rural, it's hard to imagine it employs over 1,000 people now. Since we visited in 2012, it's a pleasure to see the beautiful renovations and beautiful groundswork that Suntory has done. Here's the historic Master's Distiller's home with the paint restored. Next to it is the replica 1930s American still house that greets visitors. Beam's Claremont Distillery is still a small working industrial production, bottling and aging facility. Even after the Beam Suntory Corporation added the old Granddad plant in Frankfort, Kentucky. Computer control rooms keep the bourbon consistent, just as in many newer facilities. Grain is the base for making great bourbon, and I've yet to find a distillery in Kentucky that doesn't use either Kentucky or Indiana corn as its base. The rye and barley are ingredients that differ geographically based on the distillery. Here you can see, after the grains are broken down or milled, how they look with the grains cleaned and pulverized. After the grain is cleaned and milled, it's often ready to be fermented. Beam has a really great cooperage or barrel construction exhibit building staffed by a member of the Independent Stave Company. The components and cooperage terms are detailed on this great diagram. This barrel shows how the head and quarter hoop metal compresses the oak staves into place and bends the heavy wood to make a barrel. After the barrels are constructed, you can see one of the staves Christiane is holding, the side wall barrel pieces that are at Beam burned to a number 4 char to gently age the White Dog bourbon. The completed barrels go to a barreling porch to get filled with bourbon. Then off to the rick houses to age. Beam is working on their old 7 to 9 story rick houses, and they also have the newer 5-story above ground rick houses for aging too. It's never clear how many stories of ricks are built under the ground, kind of like a rick house basement. But some distilleries have 2 stories under the earth as well as what you see above ground. When the bourbon is finished being aged, this ramp allows the single barrel bourbon to be filtered and the char removed to make sure a single barrel bourbon is labeled correctly as a single barrel. Tours and tasting can be had at Jim Beam's Claremont, Kentucky facility, roughly 45 minutes south of Louisville, Kentucky. Today we're profiling Baker's by Jim Beam, 107 proof, 7-year small batch Kentucky straight bourbon whiskey. Baker's is named after former distiller Baker Beam. Baker is also the grandnephew of Jim Beam. If I was Mr. Baker Beam, I would be really proud of this fine bourbon named after me. It's the kind of bourbon that is smooth and light even at 107 proof. I would think that this would be a really good choice if you had the boss over for dinner. It's non-offensive and really delicious. I bought this Baker's Super Premium offering for $50 in Kentucky. Many fine, top-rated small batches are available in Kentucky, around $32 to $40 per 750 milliliter bottle. This 107 proof small batch version was first released in the 90s and is aged 7 years and age dated on the bottle, unlike many bourbons today. Its taste is credited in Beam's literature to a special jug yeast that's advertised to have been around about 60 years. The distillery staff indicated the Beam line is aged in number 4 charred barrels, and they do not believe any toasting was done on the Beam barrels. The grain ingredients, or mash bill, is 75% corn from Indiana, 13% rye from somewhere between the Dakotas to Canada, and 12% barley. Baker's is sweet, and to me has a satisfying, comfortable smell and taste, like Jim Beam's offerings were 25 years ago. The subtle oak and vanilla highlights are really good. While this bourbon is not a huge departure from the rest of the Beam traditional product line, it's my favorite Beam offering. It's crafted and it's true to Jim Beam's best bourbons I, for one, enjoyed in the past. Apparently I'm not the only one who likes it. Baker's won some great competitions the last 5 years, including the 2013 double gold medal at the San Francisco World Spirits Competition, and also the 2016 double gold medal at the New York World Wine and Spirits Competition. Next up, Christiana is going to show us how to make some really good chocolate, soaking pecans and cherries, and you guessed it, bourbon.
Hello, I'm Christiane, originally from Würzburg, Germany, and today we are gonna make a delicious bourbon chocolate cherry praline. What you need to do first is get you a can of sour pitted cherries, drain the juice completely off the cherries, put them in a bowl and cover them with bourbon. And then you put them in a sealed container and set them in the refrigerator for 2 days so they can soak up the bourbon. Next, you want to chop up a half a cup of pecans, really fine. And you can do that in a blender, or you can, if you have a chopper, do it in a chopper, whichever prefer, really fine. Then you add a 1/4 cup of bourbon, and you mix it up real good. And then you're going to put it in a sealed container for 2 days in the refrigerator. So after we soaked the pecans in bourbon, we took them out of the refrigerator, let them get into room temperature a little bit. Here they are, they soaked all the bourbon up. Then you're gonna use butter, softened butter. Kind of smush the butter down a little bit. You add vanilla. Stir that around. Then you add slowly the powdered sugar. a little bit at a time is the best, because it has to get incorporated into the butter, and you just keep on mixing, add a little bit at a time, your powdered sugar, until you used it all. Mix and stir it around. It's kind of hard in the beginning, but soon as you start stirring and mixing it, it will be okay. Then you want to add cocoa. Dark chocolate cocoa is the best. Baking cocoa. And you keep on mixing until the butter kind of soaked all the powdered sugar up. So now I add my cocoa, and all the measurements of the ingredients will be on the end of the recipe. Sometimes you have to add just a little bit more butter. And soon as you got everything incorporated nicely and smooth into your the cocoa and everything else, you add the wonderful soaked bourbon pecans. And you keep on mixing it all together very smoothly, and then you have to put it in the refrigerator for about a half an hour to let it get cold so the butter kind of stiffens back up. Now, since the chocolate bourbon mixture was in the refrigerator for about a half an hour to be kind of hard, you take a spoon, you kind of take a little bit, you form a small ball, you make a dip, you take your bourbon soaked cherry, put it inside. Now you take your spoon, add a little more on top, kind of hide the cherry inside your chocolate. And roll it. Form little balls. And then when you're doing this all right, you have nice little balls like that. Then after you have all your balls done, you have to put them back into the freezer. So after we rolled our balls, and they're sitting right now in the refrigerator, our pralines, we gonna start our double broiler. You can buy a double broiler, or what I do, I use a pan with water in it, cover the bottom about an inch with water. Then I use a stainless steel bowl, set that right over the water, kind of like it wiggles a little bit in there. Then I'm gonna throw my chocolate chips into the bowl, and a little bit of paraffin shavings, not too many, just for the chocolate to stick. Then I turn my my pan on high until the water starts bubbling, and then I turn it about on 5. The pralines came back out of the freezer. The chocolate chips, which are over here, got melted with a little bit of paraffin golf wax. You put shavings in so the chocolate is nice and runny. And now we're gonna dip, we gotta be fast. Throw that praline in the bowl and transfer it over on a cookie sheet with wax paper. Now after you dipped all of them in chocolate, you put them back in the refrigerator for about 15 minutes to let the chocolate settle. Mini cupcake holders, and now it's time to enjoy the wonderful bourbon chocolate cherry pralines. Enjoy.
Kentucky Bourbon Traveler is proud to be a member of the Stave and Thief Society Bourbon Certification Program. Last year, the Kentucky Distillers Association announced the official bourbon education program, the Stave and Thief Society. It's the official bourbon education course endorsed by master distillers and 33 distillers in Kentucky. If you enjoy getting your bourbon certificate online, even in Europe and Canada, contact Kristen Head at 502-266-0666
888-888-7377 or go online, registrar@staveandthief.com. The Bourbon Traveler.